to invite anyone who feels that they have anything to say to please do not hesitate to speak. Just do not speak over someone else. Wait till they've finished and then voice review. We want this to be quite an open session. First of all, Yani's going to tell us the headlines.
Thank you. So, as an introduction to the latest situation or the latest report from Tibet, Dalai Lama says he will resign if violence in Tibet continues. Tibet's exiled spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama, says he will resign as head of the Tibetan exile administration if violence in his homeland worsens. As Anjana Pasricha reports from New Delhi, Chinese authorities have accused him of orchestrating the riots that gripped Tibet last week. Tibetan leader, the Dalai Lama, says his only option would be to step down if the situation veers out of control in Tibet, where the protests by Buddhist monks turned violent last week. That was the introduction, and now a few other headlines. USA admits economy is in downturn. U.S. Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson has admitted that the U.S. economy is facing a sharp decline at the moment, but hoped for a recovery later in the year. The news comes after the U.S. Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, intervened to rescue troubled bank Bear Stearns, providing $30 billion in emergency support. Mr. Paulson declined to use the word recession to characterize the U.S. economy, but recent polls of both economists and the public have revealed that they disagree. Kenya members of parliament support power sharing. Kenyan MPs have approved unanimously bills needed to enact a power sharing deal between President Mwai Kibaki and rival Raila Odinga. President Kibaki is expected to appoint a cabinet with Mr. Odinga as the Prime Minister within days. A political deal was reached after violence erupted following December's disputed elections. And some more. Religion linked to happy life. A belief in God could lead to a more contented life, research suggests. Religious people are better able to cope with shocks, such as losing a job or divorce, claims a study presented to a Royal Economic Society conference. Data from thousands of Europeans revealed higher levels of life satisfaction in believers. Thank you. And now we'd like to hand over to the Tibetan representatives and also the representatives of the Chinese group. Thank you.
Good evening, all. First of all, I'd like to thank the Newsflash group for giving me the opportunity to share my views and reflect about the ongoing project in Tibet. As we all know, the project in Tibet has been headlining in lots of the bigger media like BBC, Guardian, and the CNN News. So I would like to give a brief description about what has happened so far in Tibet and how did this protest in Tibet started. The protest in Tibet begins with a demonstration on March 10, 2008, the 49th anniversary of the failed Tibetan uprising against the Chinese rule. The protest was started by some Buddhist monks calling for the release of fellow monks detained in October 2007 as they celebrated the Dalai Lama receiving the United States Congressional Gold Medal on September 27, 2007. Poster of His Holiness and the banned Tibetan official flag was seen carried by these protesters in the street of Lhasa. The protest soon turned into a call for independence, rioting, burning, and looting after the Chinese troops carried a bunch of armed rebellion and forced to stop the protesters. Tension in Lhasa increased after the city's three biggest monasteries were sealed off by thousands of soldiers and armed police amidst the largest protest in nearly 2 decades. Due to this outrage, local people also joined the protest chanting the slogan "Free Tibet, Long Live the Dalai Lama, and Free Panchen Lama." Throughout the protest, the Chinese army used tear gas and electric prods to disperse hundreds of protesters. According to research by the Tibetan Center of Human Rights and Democracy, around 99 of Tibetans were killed and more than 100 were injured, although the Chinese official has suggested the death toll to be around 12. Due to this major crackdown in Lhasa, Tibetans over different parts of Tibet also started protests in their local area to overthrow the Chinese occupation. Tibetans living in exile over different parts of the world also started peaceful demonstrations in front of the Chinese embassy, and some Tibetan youth also started hunger strike. In Beijing, hundreds of ethnic Tibetan students organized a sit-in protest in solidarity with the protesters in historic area of Tibet. The Chinese official gave the Tibetan protesters in Lhasa a deadline till Monday midnight to surrender themselves or to pay the consequences. After the deadline passed, a report was heard about Chinese troops doing a house-to-house searches in Lhasa and arresting any Tibetans whom they suspect. The foreign official from different parts of the world urged the Chinese official to deal with the protest in a peaceful way and stop using forces. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Louis Herber, urged the Chinese government to allow protesters to exercise their right to freedom of expression and assembly, and urged the Chinese government to refrain from excessive force. The Chinese official made the access of media very tight in Tibet, and especially in Lhasa. The Chinese official has accused His Holiness the Dalai Lama to be the mastermind behind the protest. However, His Holiness the Dalai Lama denied the accusation and explained he is no longer seeking independence but a complete autonomous Tibet under Chinese rule. He also expressed his support for Beijing Olympics, although the Tibetans and supporters started protests to boycott the 2008 Beijing Olympics. He also added that he will resign from his post as the political leader of Tibet government in exile if the violence in Tibet continues to get worse. The Prime Minister of Tibetan government in exile said the outbreak of protests inside Tibet was spontaneous and in nature, and said nothing was planned. He also said that peaceful solution to Tibet issues lies on Chinese side. So right now the situation hasn't calmed down yet, and it's still lots of tension and lots of intense things happening in Tibet, especially in Lhasa and different parts of the world. And very few reports about Tibet have been shown around the world.
First off, I apologize for not knowing my stuff really well. I'm translating it off Chinese websites now. But I want to give you a view on what the Chinese government's response and what, in their view, is going on in Tibet, which has quite a different emphasis from what Coxon has just told us. My sources are the Xinhua News Agency, which is the Chinese state official agency, and also a pro-Beijing newspaper. So, first of all, there is no dispute about what is happening in Tibet. The thing that separates our point of view is that the Chinese government in this Tibet self-governing territory maintains that the use of force is necessary to maintain order and stability, and to return the city to order as soon as possible. And that in the rioting that has been going on for the past few days, the Chinese government's army has rescued people from scenes where people were setting cars on fire, setting shops on fire. There were around 600 people who have been rescued so far by the Chinese army, and some of whom are tourists. And the government is stressing